Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Using Environment Variables in Qualtrax session. Final session of the day. I hope everyone's had a really great day here at the conference. My name is Sarah Smith. I am the Services Manager for Qualtrax, and I'm going to be your trainer and presenter today. Happy to say that we have David Rivera joining us. David is one of the members of our fantastic support team, so it might be a familiar name for some of you. And he has agreed to be our moderator today. So he'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A in Attendee Hub. We hope that you'll keep any and all questions coming. He is going to be looking to answer some of those throughout the session, and then we're going to have about 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A at the end of the session where we might pick a few that are commonly asked or we think would be relevant to the larger group. So thank you and welcome to David. All right, let's talk about our topics today. Our session is about using environment variables. So we need to make sure that we define what are we talking about? What is an environment variable? We're going to talk about using those environment variables in documents, specifically Word documents today, and using environment variables in emails, email actions, and email reminders. I always like in a training to clarify our learning objectives. What is it that we should know and be able to do at the end of a session or as a result? And so I've laid those out here. Hopefully by the end of today, you'll all understand what an environment variable is, as well as the benefits of using them. You know, it doesn't really matter so much if you know how to do something if you don't know why you would do it. And so we want to make sure we know how these can help or be a benefit to you. And then just practically, we want everyone to be able to use these environment variables to insert and update them in our documents, as well as in email actions and reminders. So that's the plan for today. Let's dig in. First, what is an environment variable? So we can see here, our definition is that it is a system-specific field that can be added to a Qualtrax document or email. So what are we talking about here? We're just talking about those fields and that data that's already being stored and tracked by Qualtrax and being able to pull that into documents and emails. So let's think about a few examples just to get us started. Examples of environment variables could be dates. The date that a document was published, the date that a document was approved or released for review. Document properties, things like the document's title or ID or revision number. Again, you know that these are things that are being stored in Qualtrax and being monitored. So there's nothing new there. We're just looking at how we can pull those into our documents and into our emails. This is a very small sample. And as we go through today, I'm going to show you a lot more examples of environment variables that we can take advantage of. Right now, I'm going to pull up our demo site because I want to transition into Qualtrax itself and start digging into some specifics here of how we can use these environment variables. It's a nice time just to remind everyone that you do have access to the conference demo site. That information was passed along. I'm also going to include it in my agenda slides that I will have included in the Attendee Hub for you so that you can access those as well as the recording of this session after if you should choose. So that demo site is going to be quuc2021.qualtraxcloud.com, and you can use your email address as your username and password. That's going to be the email address that you used when you registered for the conference. So our hope is you've got a nice place there to explore and to try out anything that you learned in your sessions. Maybe if you're not quite ready to try that in your production site, or you just want to kind of have a low stakes environment where you don't have to clean up any practice runs or anything like that. Right, so I'm in our demo site here, and I'm going to spend the first part of our session focused on using environment variables with documents. So I want to head to our document tree. And here we are in the document tree as always. And I could, update an existing document to add some environment variables, but instead I'm going to start at the very beginning. I'm going to start with creating a document and then editing it to include some environment variables in the mix. Specifically today, I'm going to choose to create a template. So I'm going to click on templates. And then in the upper right, there's my option to create a document here. And I'm going to choose a file that I started that just has a few like headings that'll get us started with a framework for our template here. Now, the reason that I'm choosing to create a template is just that there are some additional options that are relevant to environment variables when you're working with a template. And I want to be able to show those to you today. It's not because templates are the only documents that you can use environment variables with. So I want to make sure that that's really clear. I'm just using this because it gives me all the options to show you, including those couple extra options that we have with templates. All right, I do want to generate a PDF, but I do not want to automatically publish the first revision because I need to do some editing. I want to insert these environment variables. I'm going to update the approval, review, and notify list just for this document. And the reason is I want to be able in this session to revise this document a couple of times. And so I want to choose a group like Template Manager where I'm the only member. And that will allow me to approve the document each time we revise it and show it to you in real time. And I'm also going to pick myself as the document manager. Perfect. Now at the bottom here, we can see that there are a few custom fields that are being used with documents in this system. And that's actually one of the things I want to cover with environment variables. So to support that, I do want to fill in just a couple of these custom fields and populate them. Location, I'm going to say is location A, and we're going to assume this is a manufacturing company. All right, so I'm going to create this document. And so far, we're just using, standard document control processes. So it's asking me if I want to edit later or check out now. I want to work on it now. That automatic file transfer tool is doing its job. And now we've opened up a working copy of my document. So I'm not in Qualtrax at the moment. Just like always, when we're editing a document, I'm now in the native tool, which is Word in this case. And I've got my working copy open. As I mentioned, I had included a little bit of information to get us started. And everything I've done so far is actually in the header of this template. That's not any kind of restriction with environment variables. You can insert environment variables into the body of a document and into the header or footer. And I will show you examples of both. But using them in a header gives us a little extra flexibility that I want to be able to demonstrate for you later. So here I am in the header. If this were a document that lived outside of Qualtrax, couldn't benefit from environment variables, our option for populating this information would probably just be to manually populate. So I would come in here and type in Qualtrax header as my title. The ID I can see here is 4393. Whoops, and so on and so on. Not really that hard, but it does have its drawbacks. So when we manually populate information, either in a header or sometimes in the body of that document as well, that means that obviously we have the work of manually populating it the first time, but also the burden is on us to update that information as it changes over time. Some information doesn't change. The ID doesn't change. Title could change, probably not that frequently, but things like revision, the revision number is going to change every time you do a new revision of your document. You could have a new editor, a new publisher. You're definitely going to have a new date published every time you do a new revision. And if you are just typing that information in your document itself, you have to make sure that every time you revise your document, you also update all of those pieces of information, which can be a little laborious, but the bigger issue is it just opens up room for error because it's easily missed. So even though you're on revision 3, maybe someone forgot to update, and so your document says it's revision number 2, even though the properties in Qualtrax will tell you it's revision 3. We would encourage using environment variables to avoid all of that, because we can make it so that whatever's in the properties is what you're going to see here in your document, and that's through using an environment variable. So let's talk about how we can do that. I'm going to get rid of this text that I just typed in and replace it with what we would call an environment variable. So put my cursor in the appropriate place, and then we'll go through the steps required. Start by choosing the Insert toolbar here in Word, and that's just Word functionality. So if it appears in a slightly different place for you, it may just vary a little bit depending on your version of Word. Just take a look around and it should be there. Insert Quick Parts, which for me is here to the right of that toolbar. Field. And then I want to look for doc property in this list on the left, and they are alphabetical. So I just need to look for the section with the Ds, choose doc property. And now here in the middle, I see a list that includes a variety of environment variables. All of these are fields that are specific to documents and could be information that I would pull into my document that I'm working on. Now, first I want to say these appear here because I checked this document out of Qualtrax. If I had just opened up a new Word document and started working and I tried to follow these steps, I wouldn't see these environment variables here. It has to be a document that's been checked out. And so even if you're working on something brand new, just quickly in the beginning, create it in Qualtrax and then check it out, and you'll have full access to your environment variables. They're all going to share similar formattings. They're very easily identifiable. They're all in this all caps format with two, whatever you like to call them, number, pound, hashtag, symbols before and after each one of them. So I'm going to look for the one for title, and it's got the same name, title, as what I labeled it. So title, okay. And here where I inserted that, you'll see that it went ahead and it pulled in the title of this document. The title as I identified it when I created the document in Qualtrax, the title that lives in the document properties. And I can do the same thing with ID. So I'm still in the Insert toolbar, Quick Parts, Field, Doc Property. And this one is just labeled ID here. So ID, okay. And I went ahead and pulled that in as well. Again, the ID as it exists in the document properties. Revision number, Quick Parts, Field, Doc Property, Revision. Here we go, and okay, and so on. I know it can start to feel a little repetitive to hear Quick Parts, Field, Doc Property, but it just starts to get it really kind of embedded in everyone's mind. If it's not something you've worked with in the past, it's not that it's difficult, but there's just a couple of clicks. And so it's easy to forget, oh gosh, how exactly did she get to that pop-up window? So by just kind of repeating it when you do it a few times, it kind of helps to remind of each of the steps that are along the way. Now I'm going to do published by. I'm going to follow those same processes, Quick Parts, Field, Doc Property, and that will actually be approved by because the last approval will be our publisher. But this time when I clicked OK, you'll see nothing happened. And actually when I do date published, it's going to be very similar. Doc Property and then date published, nothing happens. And so it might be easy to worry that something has gone wrong. Maybe we've made a mistake, something didn't work, but actually nothing is wrong here. There's a very simple reason why that didn't populate. And the reason is this document hasn't been published. When we checked this out, we checked out a draft. Revision 1 is just a draft and it's never been published. So it doesn't have a published date to put here or a person that it was published by. When we check this document back into Qualtrax and we have it approved, then as long as the environment variable is there, it's going to be able to pull that information in. It would be pretty logical then to think, well, how do I know that I've put the environment variable in? I don't see it because it doesn't have anything to populate. If you ever need to see the field codes or the tokens that are behind these environment variables, you can hit Alt F9 on your keyboard. So that's what I just did. I hit Alt F9, and it's going to show me each of those field codes or tokens for each of those environment variables. So I can see for each of those that it's there. You know, I inserted the environment variable. It's just not showing anything because there's no information yet. The location field, on the other hand, there's no environment variable here. There's absolutely nothing. So I can see that in this view. I can also, if I need to, do some formatting. So for instance, there's no need for that one to be bolded when it populates. So I just use my formatting options to remove that bolding. And then I can hit Alt F9 again at any point to change back to this view. If you're using a laptop keyboard, then a lot of times you're going to need to add the function key. And so you're going to need to do function Alt F9. So if you try Alt F9 and it doesn't work, go ahead and try adding that function key in and see if that doesn't work for you. So far, all of the fields that we have wanted to use for environment variables, they've all been system fields. And by that, I mean, they are default Qualtrax fields that everybody has out of the box. Everybody has titles for their documents, IDs for their documents. There's no configuration you need to do to make that happen. It's just universal. You also, though, with your documents, have the ability to use custom document fields. In fact, when I created this template, if you remember, I was able to populate up to 4 different custom fields that had been set up to use with our documents. And that is, customizable system to system. You're able to decide for your organization, for your Qualtrax system, whether there are fields that you want associated with your documents that we didn't necessarily offer out of the gate. Things like location, maybe department that the document is associated with. Sometimes we'll see folks that want to identify the type of document in a field. Sometimes folks have a legacy ID from a previous numbering system that they want to be able to associate with their documents. All of those are examples of custom fields that you might be using with your documents. And sometimes you may want to pull those into your document itself. You want to use it, as an environment variable. So can you do that? Easy answer is absolutely. There's no barrier to using a custom document field as an environment variable. You can use those the same way that you can use a system field. However, you do need to make sure that you've got the configuration set up to allow you to do that it's set up in your system for use in a way that will let you add it as an environment variable. So I've got a good example here. It's this location option. And if I go to add this, quick parts, field, doc property, location actually is here, right? And I'm not surprised because I saw location as one of the custom fields that was available when I created my document, which is a good sign to me that it's already been configured for use and should already be available as an environment variable. So I'm going to say okay, and it pulled in the information that I had populated when I created my document, which is that this is location A. But there may be a chance that when you go to insert your environment variable and you get to that list of properties or fields, that you don't see your custom field. And you might wonder why. Why, if I can see all of the other environment variables, can I not see one to use for my custom document field? So I want to make sure that we look at the configuration and setup in Qualtrax that's required to be able to use a custom document field as an environment variable. To do that, I'm going to head back into our demo site and back into our document tree. All right. So the biggest thing that we need to do if we want to use a custom field with documents is we need to make sure that we set it up at the folder level. In this case, I'm working in the templates folder. So I need to click on templates and choose folder properties in the upper right. One of the tabs in your folder properties is custom fields. So I'm going to click on custom fields. And here's where I can see any custom fields that have already been set up to be used with this document folder. And what that means is any documents that are in this folder will have the ability to have these fields populated. There'll be a section to be able to populate. And when you create new documents, you're going to be able to populate information in these fields. So the reason that the that location was already available to use as an environment variable is because it's already been configured here from my templates folder. So I'm all good there. But that's not going to be the case if you're using a new environment variable. You've got to make sure that you come in and you configure it at the folder level. So below the ones that are already chosen, there's just a list of all of the custom fields that you could add as a document custom field for this folder. And if you want to use one of those, let's see, we'll just choose. You just choose it, say add field, and it will be added to your grid above. Right? So it's as simple as that. If you've got a new custom document field, make sure that you realize it's got to be at the folder level for where your document is. So just because location exists here at the template folder doesn't mean that it's been set up in any of your other folders in your system. So sometimes you may need to make sure it's added in a couple of different places in order to make sure that it's available for you everywhere you might need it. If you do make any changes, make sure you save them. Make sure you decide whether you need to consider any subfolders or sub items to push those changes down. And that's it. Let's say you are working on editing a document and you realize your environment variable is not there because you haven't set up the custom field at the folder level. When you come in and you do this configuration, you add your field in, you save your changes, you are going to need to check that document that you've been working on back in the system and then check it out again, because it's not going to recognize you've made that change in Qualtrax while you're editing if it's checked out. Because remember, when it's checked out, it's a working copy. It's not on the Qualtrax server. It's not able to recognize that change. So that's a pretty common one. People say, well, I set it up at the folder level, but I still don't see it in my environment variables list. Just check it in, then check it back out. You should see it there. The other thing that you do want to consider when you're thinking about using a custom field as an environment variable is you want to make sure that that data is being populated in the documents themselves. So for Qualtrax header, the one that we've been working on, I identified location A when I first created it. And that's one of the ways and one of the times that it can be populated. But it's important to note that you can also do that in the documents properties. So in the documents properties, there's a custom fields tab. And it's going to include any of those fields that were identified at the folder level. Here is where we can actually populate them. So you pick them at the folder level and you populate them at the document level. Both of these things have to be done in order when I look at this document to be able to insert the environment variable and have data actually populate here. Even if you can insert it, if you don't have any data to pull in, it'll just be blank, kind of like the published information is right now. As long as you take care of those, you can use any of your custom document fields the same way you would use a system field and pull them into your document using an environment variable. Final thing I want to mention, I told you that you can include environment variables in the body of a document as well. So I just want to demonstrate that. I'm going to come out of the header into the body. And let's say I want the title to also be here. I know that it's in the header, but I want it to be kind of large and prominent on this first page. So I'm going to go to Quick Parts, Field, Doc Property, and choose Title again. Oops, here we go. Say OK. And I can also format this just like I would anything else. So I'm going to select it, and maybe I want title formatting. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to bold it. I could change the color. I could change the font. I'm going to actually center that. Anything like I would do to any other text. But when I hit Alt F9, you can see that that is my environment variable. So the perk there is, even though the title's in two different spots in my document, if the title is ever updated in the document properties, it's going to be able to be updated in both spots here without me having to do the work of doing that. So I don't need to remember, oh yeah, the title is listed out in 3 different spots in my document. I can just use environment variables, and anytime it's changed, it'll be changed in all of those spots in the document. All right, so I think it's time that we can publish this and take a look. So I'm just going to save a working copy here and close it. Back in Qualtrax, I want to check it in. So we're back to this document control process, checking the document in and then approving it. I'm going to release it for approval. And remember, I'm the only approver, so this should go pretty quick. This is initial template creation. I'm going to do the one-click release and approve all in one. So it should get to work and show me my published document. Perfect. So here's the end product. It is now in Qualtrax. So if any of this information were to change, it could change because we're on the server itself. And we've got all of these environment variables that have been populated, including those published by and date published fields that previously were empty. Now that the document's been published, Qualtrax is able to pull that data in for us and display it. So I've promised that as this information changes, it can be updated in the document. Now I want to demonstrate that to you. Some of these fields can be updated whenever you need to in document properties. Things like title and location, because location is a custom field. And if we do that, then they can be updated in the document without actually having to put the document into edit or do a new cycle of revision and approval. So let's try that out. Let's go to properties of this document. And first, let's change the title. So I'm going to do environment variable session template. And I'm going to save that change. You know, sometimes you might just realize you've got a typo in your title or you need to be more specific or something like that. So you can always change that title here in your properties without having to go into the document itself. Custom fields, same. Maybe I either previously didn't populate it or I realized there was a mistake. It's actually location B. Save those changes. So you can always change these in the properties. If this information is also in the document and you just typed it in, we would need to go through a whole new revision of the document in order to change it. But if you've used environment variables like we have, system can take care of it for you. So if I go back to the document, at first I might be a little disappointed and think, well, this looks the same. It didn't even change for me. And the reason is just document automation hasn't run yet. So if I just wait for document automation to run, it's going to update on its own. For today, I'm actually a little impatient. I want you guys to be able to see this. So I'm going to go to actions and just manually kick off that document automation for us and then go back to my doc. And now that document automation in the system is run, it's noticed, hey, there's a difference here, and it's populating those environment variables with the updated information. New title in both positions and location B instead of location A. So hopefully you can already start to think about the ways that this might save a little work, save some cycles of revision that might not be necessary. Anywhere you're including information in your document that could come from an environment variable, think about replacing that static text with an environment variable, whether that's in the header, the footer, or the body of that document. Next thing that I want to touch on is you might have noticed that this date published is a very long full date timestamp format. And that's just default Word functionality. And if you like it, great. But we do have some folks who say, I would prefer just date only, either because that's my preferred format or just because the full timestamp takes up too much space, too much screen real estate. Good news is you can update your date formatting. And the best time to do that is really when you're initially adding your environment variable. So I want to show you one resource before we get into actually showing how to do that, a resource that can help you if you are looking to modify your date format. And it is just a page in our help guide. So I'm going to click on help guide. You guys are probably aware there's a link to help guide in the lower left portion of Qualtrax. I bet a lot of you are very familiar with the help guide. There are certain pages that I always refer back to, and one of them is the one for environment variables. So I'm just going to search environment variable, and it's my very first result. There are two different things on this page that I always go back to again and again. First one, at the bottom, is there's a list of all of those document variables that we saw when we were adding our environment variables in. And each one of them has a really clear description, which can be really helpful. It's not always easy to tell just by looking what exactly is it pulling. You know, even things like, well, I see approved by, but then I see approvers. Well, what's the difference? And when I look at the description, I can see approved by is the most recent approver. Approvers is going to give me a list of everyone who's identified as an approver. Well, that's a different piece of information, even though they sound a whole lot alike. So this can be a really nice reference for that. Or if you haven't used environment variables much, I would probably just review this list just to see what's possible, just to get an idea for what's in there. And then right above this is the other thing that I like to reference, which is there is a whole section on modifying the date formats in Word. That's why this was the perfect time to take a peek. It'll give you some instructions, but the part that I really want right now is there's a section on field codes that I can use to choose my preferred format and actually copy the field code that I need. So here I see some examples. I can pick my preference. I tend to prefer this first one. That's just my personal preference. I like 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and then 4-digit year. So what I want to do is I want to copy everything after the date portion of the field and just copy that date formatting portion at the end. Now the example they're giving us is for date published. This can be used with any date field out there. So that's why I'm just copying this last portion. And now what I want to do is I want to modify this environment variable. Now, because I'm trying to modify the environment variable itself, basically what I'm going to need to do is remove it and then add it back in. You can tweak it once it's been added in, but I like to just do it when I add it. Either way, doing this does require us to edit the document and do a new revision. It's not something that we can do in a published state. So I'm going to choose edit. My reason is I need to modify a date format. And let's check that out. All right. I'm just going to hit Alt F9 to identify exactly where that date published environment variable is. I'm highlighting it, deleting it. I'm going to hit Alt F9 again. And now I'm going to show you what it would be like when you're adding the environment variable to go ahead and modify that date format. So I've got my cursor where I want it. I'm going to choose Insert, Quick Parts, Field, Doc Property. I know I'm a broken record by now. And I want to choose Date Published again. But this time, before I say OK, I need to look in the bottom left and click on Field Codes. This will show me the field code for my date field that I'm using. And all I need to do is add that little date formatting that I copied. I just need to paste that or add that here after. So I'm just going to paste that in. And again, it could be with any date field that we're using. And once I do add that formatting, I'm going to say OK. If I want to confirm, I can always hit Alt F9 and you can see it in there. That's what it looks like when you add in that formatting. And that's it. Okay, so, now that you know how to do it, you can just do this when you initially add it. I'm doing it as a second round because I always want you to see first what it looks like if you don't modify at all, and then the option to modify if you choose. So I'm going to save and close this, check it back in. And then release it for approval with myself. One click, release and approve. This time, when we take a look at our document, we should be on to revision 2, and we are. You'll see it went ahead and updated that for me. And now my date format is in my modified format that I specified. Okay, so far, everything that I've done with documents, you could do with any document. So if your document was located in any folder in your tree, you could do everything that I've done. You could insert the environment variables, update your formatting, put it in the header or the body, all those things. But there are some added benefits when we're working with a template to using environment variables. And so I want to show you what some of those things will look like. So as a reminder, when you're dealing with a template, you can use templates for one of two things. First, you can create new documents from a template. So when you're getting ready to create a new document, if you've got a template, you can use that as your starting point, and it will give you a copy of that template as the starting point for your new doc. Second is for any Word document in your system, if you have a header that's included in your template, you can apply that header, and also a footer if you choose. You can apply the header and footer to the header and footer area of any other documents in your system. Both of those things have added pros when we add in or factor in environment variables. So let's take a peek at what we mean by that. I'm going to go back to the document tree. First, let's create a document from a template. So I'm going to go, actually, there's a gadgets folder here. I choose that, and I'm going to click create document here. But instead of creating from a file I have, I want to create from a template. Specifically, I want to create from the template that we just made together. So I'm going to choose the environment variable session template. I'm going to give this new doc a name. We're in the gadget folder, so maybe I'll say this is a gadget overview. I do want to generate a PDF. I'm going to leave everything else pretty much the way that it is because I just want to show this example to you. So it's okay if it's still a document in edit. In fact, I'm going to say let's edit it later so I can just look at it. And here's my link to be able to view that document in edit status. And you can see here that this document is just a copy of the template. But because the template included environment variables, it's able to be populated with information about this new document. So it's got the document ID of the document we just created, the title of that. All of this information is about this new document we've created. Whereas if the template had just had static text, that exact text would have come over and been copied into here. So it's a way to help you leverage your templates to better advantage if you can utilize some of these environment variables. And people do this, for a variety of reasons. If as a starting point, you want just some basic formatting in your document to help folks get started, creating from a template is a great way to do that. And environment variables might let you leverage that even more. Second use of a template, as I mentioned, is you can use the header footer updater tool to apply the header of a template to as many other Word documents in your system as you'd like. And as long as that header is using environment variables, that's going to mean that you can have maybe a single header that can be used on a lot of different documents. So let's take a peek at what that looks like. First of all, if you aren't aware of the header footer updater tool, you can access it by clicking on your name or your account name in the upper right, choosing user preferences. And installers for all of our client tools are here in the lower right. So if you haven't previously installed that header footer updater, you might want to take advantage of that, especially if you want to just practice based on this session. I do have that tool, so let me open it up. This one's not within the interface. This is a separate installed tool, so it's going to be, on your device. It is specific to each device. So I'm just searching for it and then opening it up. When you do, you're going to get a pop-up asking you to enter your URL. I've been in this system all day, so it already knows. It'll keep that information once you enter it, and then asking me for my credentials so that it can make sure that my account in Qualtrax allows me to to apply headers and footers to documents. All right, here in the header footer updater tool on the left, we get to select which template has the header and or the footer that we want to use. So once again, I want to use the one that we just looked at. Then on the right, it's going to ask me which document I'd like to apply this to. And actually, let me show you the document that I'm going to choose here in Qualtrax. I have this document for bond cars. When I look at it, you'll see it doesn't have any header at all yet. It's a very plain, bland looking document here. So I've chosen the header from my template, and I'm going to look for that exact same document. That's the one I want to apply this header to. For our example today, for this one, I'm just going to do this for the one document, but it's important to note that right here, I can apply the same header and footer to as many documents as I'd like. I could do a big batch of them. So if you can find a header that really works for groups and batches of documents, you don't have to manage those one at a time. You can apply those in bulk. You can reapply those later in bulk if needed. I can have comments to add to the revision history. When you use the header footer updater tool, there will be a note in that document's revision history stating that the header footer tool was used to apply a header and a footer. But you can also add comments. So I might say something like initial application of header. So this is the reason I'm doing this is it's the first time. It didn't even have a header first. And whatever you put in these comments will also be added to the revision history of any of the documents that you are updating. You also have the ability to decide whether this change merits an increase or an increment in the revision number. That's really up to you. Some people say, you know what, as long as there's a comment in the history, I think we don't need a new revision number. We're fine to stay with the same revision number. Some folks say this is a significant enough change that I would like to increment the revision number. Regardless of which one you choose, you don't have to actually go through putting the document in edit and approving it. It's just a matter of whether it will be considered a new revision after you apply the header and the footer. So entirely up to you. For today, I'll choose to increment it so we can see what that looks like. And apply. All right, so it's getting to work applying that header to my selected document. I should get a little note letting me know that it's successful and I can close. Now let's look at that same cars document. Back to documents, click on cars. Perfect. So it added the header from my environment variable template right here. But because I included all those environment variables, all of this information is still relevant to the bond cars doc. Here's the title, the ID, the revision. So you can see how if you use those environment variables wisely, you could use that to manage a header that could work for a lot of different documents in your system. It is important to note that when you're using the header footer updater tool, it's not going to do anything with any information that's in the body of that template. So remember, my template did have a title in the body. That will come over when you're creating a new document. But with the header footer updater, it's only going to touch what's in the header or the footer. If those were blank or empty in your document, then of course they'll be populated. And if there is an existing header or footer, it's going to be replaced with whatever is in the template if you use that header footer updater. Okay, so I think we've done a really good overview of utilizing environment variables in our Word documents in kind of a variety of ways. Let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about what it's like when we use these environment variables in emails. So I'm going to turn my attention here on the left and click on administration. All right, and the two areas we're going to be taking a peek at here are email actions and email reminders. So I'm going to start by clicking on email actions. Couple notes. You would need access to email actions administration in order to get here. So that's something you might want to take a peek at to see in your system if that's something you have access to. I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs of email actions and reminders. I'm really just going to focus on the use of environment variables. But there was a full session on email actions and reminders. So if you were not able to attend that, but you are interested, you might just want to check out the recording that's going to be made available to you post-conference. You're welcome to check out any of the sessions that you missed. I know everyone wasn't able to attend every session, but you can take a peek at those later if you'd like. So email action as a reminder is a one-time email that is sent to a recipient of your choice, letting them know that an action has occurred in Qualtrax. Okay, they can be about a variety of things, and they can include environment variables. So let's look at an example. Let's look at this one here for test. I'm going to go over and click edit. All right. So here we have an email action for test. It's designed to notify testers or test takers that a test has been assigned to them. You'll notice when we look that the email is structured and divided into a subject and a body. So subject is what will appear, of course, in the subject line, and body within the body of the email. Both of them can include environment variables, and you should recognize by now the formatting. It's going to be the same here in this section. So everywhere you see one of these, that means it's an environment variable. And when the email is sent, it's actually going to be pulling in information from that field rather than displaying, exactly what you see here in the text. So when I get this email action, it might say something like, you've been assigned the following test, bloodborne pathogens, or annual safety test. It's going to fill in whatever the name of that test is. Same thing in the body. Here we've got the test ID and the title. We even have some environment variables that are being used to create a link within this email. You are able to insert as many of these environment variables as you need to give the appropriate information to your user. And if you need to insert a new environment variable, we've got space here. You can choose from the list of environment variables that's available here. So maybe I want to include the test instance ID. You'll see when I click it, it's included here. And you can also copy and paste it if you need to move it around. So if you decide you actually want that in your subject, you can copy and paste it up there, or remove just by deleting that from wherever it's located. So I would definitely think about the kind of emails that you've gotten in your Qualtrax, from your Qualtrax system. If some of those have left a little bit to be desired, you feel like they could be more specific, or you need to change the wording, consider environment variables in that mix. You might be able to add some additional information or adjust where they appear or how they appear in order to make it a little more clear for your email recipients. Now, if I go back to email actions, I do want to make sure to point out that you can add an email action if needed. And this is a good way for me to show you that what you have available as environment variables changes depending on the module that we're dealing with. So we already saw the one for test. Now I'm going to pick training. So here we've got some different environment variables. It's going to show me the date it was assigned, any approvers. There's a variety of information that's going to be here. If I look at, say, documents, here we go. I've got fields that are relevant to documents, so things like ID and title. You can even have email actions that are related to users. So that's for things like, hey, an account was created, an account was locked out. So you've got some environment variables that are relevant there. And for your workflows, you're going to see environment variables, some that are common across all workflows, like ID and responsible party, but some that are very specific just to the individual workflow, because remember, those are full of custom fields. And that's why when you pick for workflow from the module, you actually need to pick a specific workflow rather than just workflows as an entire module, monolithic module. With email reminders, there are some things that are similar, but there are some things that are a little bit different. So first, let's remind ourselves of the difference between an email action and a reminder, because I think that will help to explain why we need to approach where and how we use environment variables a little bit differently. Remember, an email action, what we just covered, that's a one-time email to whoever you choose saying, hey, something happened in Qualtrax, an action was completed. An email reminder is an email that's going to go to a user, letting them know they have a task that's been assigned to them and it needs to be taken care of. It's either approaching its due date, it's already late, or it's very late. Because it's a reminder that you have to complete a task, it can happen multiple times. You're going to keep getting that reminder until the task is complete. And reminders involve more than just an email. They also impact the icons that are in your inbox. So they're bigger than just the email, but they do include an email that's going to continue to be sent to you. Let's look at an example here. I'm going to look at this one for tests. This is a reminder that's telling the recipient, whoever was assigned the test, hey, this test has been sitting in your inbox for at least 7 days. You need to take care of it because it's approaching its due date. It's going to be late soon. Because of the nature of an email reminder, sometimes you will have multiple items that all meet the criteria for the same reminder. So in this example, tests sitting in our inbox for 7 days, I would love to think I'd only have one, but I could have 5 that have been sitting in my inbox. And Qualtrax will bundle those together in a single email reminder. So instead of you getting 5 different emails that all say the same thing but about a different test, I can get one email that says you have tests that have been in your inbox for at least 7 days, and then it just has a list of all 7 of those tests. Because of that, because that's the way it operates, we would recommend that you only use environment variables in the body. The emails for a reminder are divided into 3 parts: subject, intro, and body. Subject is going to be in the subject line of your email, and it should be relevant regardless of whether I have 1 test that's late or almost late or 5. If this were about documents, same thing. It should be relevant whether I have 1 document that needs to be approved or 20. Environment variables are specific to 1 task, 1 test, 1 document, 1 whatever the example is. So we don't want to try to put those into the subject. That would be a bit confusing. We would be putting information that is too specific into a subject that needs to be able to apply to multiple examples. Same thing with the intro. The intro is going to be in the body of the email, but it's going to be above the list of all of the examples of the tasks that you have. So it also needs to be relevant to the full list. So again, we recommend not using email or environment variables in the intro section of your email. Body, though, have at it. Do whatever environment variables you'd like. This information is going to populate, and you're going to have that for every, in our example here today, every test that's approaching its due date, or whatever the case might be, whatever it is, every task you have that meets the requirements for this reminder, you're going to have the information that's listed in the body for each of those. So that's the perfect place to use your environment variables and say, this is the specific test that's waiting, and then this is the next one, and the next, and so on. Works exactly the same. You click if you want to insert it. Again, keep it to the body, and the environment variables that it's going to show and demonstrate to you are going to vary depending on the module that you're in. Right, so I know it was a bit packed. We went over a lot. I just want to remind you, you can practice in the conference demo site. We would absolutely encourage that. Let us know if questions come up along the way. And now we have about 5 minutes for some Q&A if we have any questions. So love to check in with David. Do we have any questions?
Yes, Sarah, we did get quite a few for this session, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with what code would you use if you wanted to show the titles of approvers versus the individual's name? Where can users find, I guess, what resources do users have to kind of find the different environmental variables available to them?
So if you're looking for the available environment variables, you're definitely going to want to look in the help guide in the section that I showed you. If you search environment variables, it will give you a list. The difficulty is the title is not a field, or title of individual users is not necessarily a field that's associated with documents. So by default, there wouldn't be a clean way to do that. I'm trying to think if there'd be like a nice workaround to be able to include that. Unless it was somewhere in the document. I might have to think about that. If you want to keep that person's name, because obviously you can pull the approvers in, because approvers as well as approved by, those are custom fields, but that's always going to pull someone's name. It's not going to be able to pull their title because that's not a document field.
Okay.
But if you want to keep that information, I'll see if there's any kind of workaround or creative solution I could think of for that.
For sure, thank you. And there were a few that I did answer, but I was hoping you could kind of give a little bit more information, your perspective on this. Can you use the header footer updater tool to replace the header footer that currently exists in document in your system with a new version of a header footer? An example would be you currently aren't using environmental variables, but you want to start using them. So how would that work?
Yes, absolutely. When you use the header footer updater tool, it allows you to replace whatever is in the header and footer area with the header and or footer from your template. So if there's nothing there, then there's nothing to replace. So it's like you're adding it anew, but it will replace an existing header or footer. And that's something to be aware of across the board. But it does have its benefits, exactly like you're saying. If you aren't currently using environment variables or updating to a new header format, you can set that one time in your template, and then you can apply it to as many documents as you'd like. It will replace whatever headers and footers are there. I didn't specifically point it out in the tool today, but it is important to note when you're using the header footer updater tool, there's a couple of checkboxes that let you pick which ones you want to update. So if for some reason you only want to update the header, but you want to leave the footer alone, or vice versa, there are checkboxes in that tool that let you do that. By default, it will check both, and therefore will be updating or replacing both.
Thank you. A user also asked, can you lock or protect the title so it cannot be edited when a person checks out the document for editing? We were able to, I was able to provide the information, about a little information about the alter properties permission. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so, well, there's no way to lock it down so that it's not possible to change the title of a document, but you can control who is able to do that through permissions and access. So not everyone has access to the properties of a document. So you probably just want to take a look at the way that your permissions are set up and the access you've provided, and just check to make sure that the folks that have access, you are comfortable with changing the title. But if you have the ability to update the general tab of document properties, you are going to be able to update the title. There's no way to specifically lock someone out of that one.
Okay. We did try to get to everyone's questions. If you feel like your question probably wasn't answered, maybe we answered the wrong question, understood it incorrectly, definitely let us know. Shoot us an email to support@qualtrax.com. If you didn't think of anything during the presentation, but think of something tomorrow and just say, hey, what about this? Definitely, reach out to support. We'll be happy to answer any questions there. Thank you for a very informative presentation, Sarah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for keeping an eye on that Q&A and doing those questions. Guys, I want to thank everybody who attended. I know this is final session of the day. So thanks not only for attending my section, but just thanks on behalf of the Qualtrax team. We know that we always love to get together in person, but we're so excited we were finally able to have a user conference in our virtual format. We hope you'll let us know how you liked it, what you'd like to see for next time and for future opportunities. And definitely reach out to support@qualtrax.com if you have any questions or follow up. Thanks so much. Hope everybody has a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.